and welcome to today's episode of The World's History. For our history lesson today, we will be investigating the Mexican Revolution. We have a few historians with us today who are experts in this area. The revolution was a very difficult time for many groups of people, but brought throughout the entire revolution, the economic as well as political and social status of the citizens and government officials was constantly changing. The revolution began after Porfirio Diaz's dictatorship, when he improved all economic and political issues. He served in the army under Benito Juarez in 1862 to 1867, with liberals versus the French. Diaz led a rebellion against General Lerdo, who served under Juarez in 1876. Later, he won the presidency. Today, we have James with us, and he will be talking about Diaz's time.
Hola. So, the rebellion was a stressful time for most people, but it brought great achievements afterwards. It expanded the commercial agriculture, as well as separated the church and state. Diaz helped restore order and progress by including things such as the railroads. He also made many bad changes to the social environment because he gave all of the land to the haciendados. This led to the native Indians losing their culture.
Diaz created a policy of no re-election, which he later went against himself, because he essentially hired a villain, who was Gonzales, and later took his presidential spot again. He managed to weaken the army by putting the rurales in power, and could not face Francisco Madero's revolution. Later, he fled to Paris, and after losing the Battle of Ciudad Juarez, which allowed Francisco Madero to come into power. This was the beginning of the Mexican Revolution in 1910.
Madero began his revolution in 1910. When he tried to gain supporters, he was thrown in jail when Diaz was in power. But from there, he issued the Plan de San Luis Potosí. The plan void and nulled the elections of 1910 and called for an armed revolution against Diaz. After being released, he promised agrarian reform to the peasants and won their vote. After the treaty, Ciudad Juarez, in which Diaz resigned from dictatorship in May 1911 and allowing Madero to become president. He did not last long, though, because his main general, Victoriano Huerta, eventually rebelled. Madero wanted reconciliation, but was stopped by Diaz's supporters, the Porfirians. Supporters went against him because he did not make any progress, and Zapata issued the Plan de Ayala, denouncing Madero because of his lack of interest in land reform. Bernardo Rios and Felix Diaz revolted against Madero and were both sent to jail. They planned against Madero in jail and convinced Victorio Huerta to trick Madero.
Huerta forced Madero to resign and eventually assassinated him. Huerta continues to be in power and created problems with the United States. Huerta also wanted to reestablish the Porfirian form of government. The U.S. president at the time thought that Huerta was going against the Constitution of Mexico, and because of this, the U.S. banded with the Constitutionalists, a group that was aided by Carranza.
Everything went downhill when the Plan de Guadalupe was passed. The plan essentially did not recognize Huerta as president, and the U.S. occupied Veracruz, cutting off arms from Mexico's Mosilla provider, Germany. Eventually, his army suffered several more defeats, and Huerta stepped down and fled.
Hola, señoras y señoritas. Do you guys want change? All you gotta do is get the change piñata. Woo! And then you get all the change that you want.
And we're back with our episode of The World's History. To continue, Zapata was the next big leader in the Mexican Revolution.
Zapata focused on Morelos and the National Revolution. His slogan was Tierra y Libertad. He was also leader of many landless peasants that were known as Zapatists, and he turned them into well-equipped professional army that was Carranza's most formidable enemy, and called for the return of land that was taken away during the land reforms. He was also disillusioned with Madero.
Later in the revolution, Carranza was opposed by Pancho Villa, one of the men who attacked the U.S. to stop Carranza until Obregón declared war. One thing that stuck out about Villa was that he was able to raise a huge army and caused U.S. intervention. Now I will introduce our expert on Villa. Here he is.
Hey Esther, thank you for inviting me here today. I'll talk to all of you guys about a general in the Mexican Revolution named Villa. He was a very successful man and a very smart man too. But the strange thing was that he did not want to be put in a position of power. And he just stayed as a general the whole entire time. Villa was a conventionalist and did not like the fact that there was one person that made most of the decisions, and that person was a man with a lot of power. But he was a nationalist that was very anti-American. Because of this hatred, he created many problems with America and also Carranza. As a general, he made sure his army grew, and they did. They became very powerful. Villa and his army was able to crush the Zacateas, and by doing this destroyed the hope that many conservatives had.
Wow, well there you have it guys, the story of Villa and what type of person he was. But because of this, I wonder, how did Carranza deal with all of this craziness? Let's ask our expert.
Hello, Esther. Yes, I do know a lot about Carranza, so let me tell you about him. Carranza came into the revolution pretty late, and he was a huge supporter of Madero. Carranza was a constitutionalist, and when he got into power, he ordered Gonzalez to attack Morelos, but he was defeated. In addition, and in power, he also proposed the Plan de Guadalupe. This was a response to Huerta's brutal and cruel dictatorship, which stated that Huerta should be eliminated, and also that the Constitution of 1857 should be restored. He started to become pretty successful, but then he got assassinated.
The revolution was later led by a man named Obregón. He was associated with liberalism and modernism at the time he was involved with the Mexican Revolution. Obregón's presidency was the first stable presidency since the revolution began in 1910. He allied with organized labor amongst other tactics, which allowed him to create control and cooperation. He participated in the Aguascalientes Convention of 1914. Afterwards, he declared war against Villa.
On August 16, 1914, Obregón and 18,000 of his troops marched triumphantly into Mexico City. He was joined shortly by Carranza. In 1924, Obregón's hand-picked successor, Plutarco Elias Calles, was elected president, and although Obregón retired to Sonora, he remained influential under Calles. He opposed the Huerta regime. Obregón won the 1928 presidential election, but before he could begin his term, he was assassinated by a religious extremist.
In Mexico City, Obregón moved to extract revenge on his perceived enemies. He believed that the Mexican Catholic Church had supported the Huerta regime and therefore imposed a fine of 500,000 pesos on the church to be paid to the Revolutionary Council for aid to the people. The 1924 Calles presidential campaign was the first populist presidential campaign in the nation's history, as he called for land redistribution and promised equal justice, more education, additional labor rights, and democratic governance. Calles did not, however, receive much support from the U.S., who was worried that his reforms would lead to a loss of control on oil investments in Mexico.
Under Calles' rule in 1926, there was legislature passed prohibiting consecutive re-election, so Obregón took over again, and then Calles resumed control after Obregón was assassinated. He played a large role in the redistribution of land to the poor. He was responsible for creating the Partido Nacional Revolucionario, or PNR, which eventually became the Partido Revolucionario Institucional, PRI, which governed Mexico until 2000, making it the longest ruling political group in the 20th century. The term El Maximado refers to Calles' domination of Mexican politics through the PNR. He also supported the church and church's power, which eventually led to the spark that started the Cristero Rebellion.
Cardenas, in 1940, redistributed land to more people than any of the other presidents combined. He reorganized the PNR as the PRM and formed ejidos that ultimately failed.
He was popular among many classes of people and had an impressive presidential campaign and wanted democracy and not political dominance. Because of that fact, he was voted in due to his popularity rather than political or military force. It showed a change in Mexican leadership and politics.
That's all for today. Thank you to all the historians who helped out on the show. And here from New Mexico, I want to say, keep studying history. Adios! Uno, dos, tres.
Ay, 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 ay. We are the personas de Mexico. We love revolution, we love them, we do. We love revolution, we take them from you. Sí.
Uno, dos, tres.
Ay, 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 ay. We are the personas de Mexico. We love revolution, we love them, we do. We love revolution, we take them from you.